ADHD, but I can never stick it through to just like write out. Like I like writing, and I like, I like writing things out for my players if I'm running a campaign,
Sure.
or for like co-players, but for like public consumption, I just like stopped caring about a quarter of the way through.
Yeah.
I don't know how some people do it so reliably every single time.
They just the same way a bodybuilder does. They're not having fun the whole time. It's just like, well, what else have they got? They're just going to power through
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Okay, so I sent us live. We can start at any point.
Awesome.
So
I'm gonna take a vitamin really quickly.
yeah, no, please go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like anybody's getting enough sun these days, so those are pretty
Oh my
important.
God. Yeah. I mean, like, I realize that I'm also going from a weird situation where, like, a lot of people are moving from one semi-sedentary lifestyle to a different, more sedentary lifestyle. But for me, I'm moving from, like, I was literally outside for 8 hours a day to
Nothing.
I am really fucking not outside kind of at all.
Yeah.
And it's really fucking with me. It's like fucking me up. I just, there's no other way to put it. Like it is really actively eroding like my routines, my mental health. Like it's bad. So I'm very looking forward to trying to find some way to routinize some other way of being outside.
I mean, I have a yard.
Yeah.
That saves me a lot. I'm also in a state that does not care or to a great deal even believes that this is a real thing.
That's the problem, right? Like if everyone was like distancing well, it would like we could actually have a pretty normal life, you know? But
like most countries in the world.
It's literally just do the things you normally do, but with a mask on.
That's
And like that would literally be it. The protests really underscored that, right? Like I just sort of when I started going out almost daily for a little while, and especially as like doing medic work, because then you have to be so close to people
Totally.
sometimes. I was like, I'm just gonna get it. Like I just know I'm gonna get it, and I'm like resigning myself to that. And I accept it. I'm gonna go anyway. But I didn't. I tested negative like consistently, and like most other people did too, because people at protests wear masks.
That's it.
Because people at protests are there because they care about other people.
Yeah, it's really simple.
It's so fucked up. Anyway, maybe we'll get there as this summer shows this country. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, hey, there's always hope.
There's always
just
hope.
Not much of one for hope.
Yeah. Anyway, if you want to take it live, I'm
yeah.
Ready.
Well, we've been live this whole time.
Oh, cool. Great.
And this is all going in the recording, so don't worry about it. Cap, if you were trying not to swear or anything, well, too late.
I figured this is not a family friendly, a language, shall we say, language friendly podcast and recording after our first interview, when I like really tried for a second, and then you were like, "Why are you doing that?"
Yeah. Who do you think is watching this? Like, this isn't going to Harper's. Like, there isn't like a written version of this winding up in like a pediatrician's office.
Oh my God, Jesus Christ! What? That's like a personal nightmare. Oh God.
So I guess if
for you, because I know that your job was also primarily teaching youth, right? Like.
Yeah. Basically, we've been looking at how to do it in a digital format.
Okay.
So very similar to what you were doing. It is just a different landscape. There are certain things that are just as easy or marginally more difficult, right? Running a basic role-playing game session with 4 kids. Not that hard.
Yeah, that's not bad.
It can be done. But 50 kids simultaneously and you're dealing with board games, very different.
It's very different. I know that at my old job, we, at least by the time that I got laid off, like there were some experiments in like the breakout rooms. Like we would have everyone gather up and then like specific groups of kids with specific teachers would go out into a breakout room, and like that helped a little bit. It still doesn't necessarily solve, any kind of connectivity issue
No,
or like,
there's always kind of the technical barrier. It's just there are certain aspects of analog games that transpose well to a digital format, right? CCGs are a natural example, right? If they didn't work so well, you couldn't have Magic the Gathering Arena be such a successful thing.
oh, see, competitive card game.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, sorry.
I was like, what does that stand for? But okay, cool, I
Yeah.
get it now.
RPGs, I'd say probably are the next step of difficulty, but like we have a bunch of tools that we've developed over the years, right? Even if
Yeah,
you don't use Roll20, modern designers think in terms of how does this get played, not just at a physical table.
right. Yeah, because that's like marketability, and like even before quarantine became such a regular thing, it's also like international marketability, right?
Totally.
And how do you play with friends across time zones, etc.
That was
Yeah.
outside of conventions. That has been for the past 3-4 years the majority of my playtime. I
Interesting.
have not maintained an in-person game group for a role-playing game since 2013.
Oh, what?
Um,
Wait, for real?
yeah, so 7 years I
Oh,
haven't had like an in-person game group.
so you're this is in some ways like very old hat for you,
Yeah, this
actually.
is just like, oh, everyone's playing games the way I play games now.
Hmm.
The difference is like I was supposed to be in Toronto and London already and Indianapolis soon, and those aren't happening. So my convention attendance has definitely changed.
Yeah, that's been the biggest hit on like the cultural landscape for me in games is the absence of conventions, because like I feel like there is this seasonal ritual that we all prepared for, and it didn't matter what convention you go to. Like I've still never been to Gen Con or Origins,
Sure.
but I know that those are mainstays for a lot of people. But like Big Bad Con is my local con. I went many, many years. And I usually went to at least one of the Dex cons, like whether it was Dreamation or Metatopia.
Same.
Um, and yeah, and like those being split over the year, like it was just like this constant seasonal ritual of like now I will see all of my colleagues and
Yeah.
peers and friends, and the absence of that is very, very weird. And tracking the impact that it's having on people I know is also really interesting.
Yeah. I've kind of observed two things occur. One is something that I think we were already moving toward. Um, Obviously, there's the public forum of Twitter, right? Which I think,
Right,
especially post G Plus closing down, is like the sole public forum. Um,
right.
Other things exist, but I don't really know anyone who uses them. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know many designers who really keep up with Reddit. Um,
Not a lot, and like the ones I do know tend to come from like specific traditions.
yeah.
One of the things that the last half year or so has shown me is how generational these
Mm-hmm.
differences can be, not just through like the people I know in games, but also from like I guess I shouldn't say the half year. The last several years have shown me that different forms of social media are very generational because of the way that I would constantly get roasted by my kids. Like,
Yeah.
they're like, "You have a Facebook?" I thought that was just for really not just old people, really
Really old people.
old people.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I guess it is, guys.
Yeah. My stepmother's parents have active Facebooks. Like, that's the
Right,
generation.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I mean, we are
but,
Facebook friends, but like, I'm never on Facebook.
yeah. And I'm actually on Facebook a fair amount because I think Facebook is actually weirdly active for games, for like this very
Hmm.
small niche of like indie analog games people. They actually use Facebook a fair amount because there's groups, right? Like Facebook
Sure.
groups are actually a really easy way to get people together and talking about the same thing. It's still convenient to reach Messenger through Facebook, even though you
Mm-hmm.
don't need Facebook for it. But also, like, there are just some people who really like Facebook, and a lot of them are in games. So I don't know if it's the aspect of like you can close the loop, right? Like you can curate friends lists so
Sure.
it's not public.
I mean, to an extent, it is what made G Plus work, right? I mean, when we
Right.
think about what was the history of that platform, it was Google's Facebook competitor.
Yeah.
It was designed to fill that same niche, whereas Twitter was designed to fill a completely different one.
Yeah, it's very different. It's very different. And it's like, it's been interesting to track how it's evolved to, I didn't use it actively at all when it was like 140 characters. You couldn't really do threads. Like threads were just not a thing as much. Um, and as that changed, the tone of it has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And the way that people engage with it has changed a lot. And and it's interesting because, like, you know, as a writer, paying attention to cadence in a long Twitter thread is really interesting to me. It doesn't always behoove you to like just split it up by character allowance, for example. Like if you want something to like really register, you can like actually plan for that differently, and you had no leeway to do that before on Twitter.
No, I mean, I think it's evolved the same, or at least similar structural rules
Mm-hmm.
as text conversations.
Yeah.
Whereas something like Facebook is definitely much more enmeshed still in the world of like blogs and forums.
Yeah, yeah. You know, to be really honest, I miss the blog heyday, like back when everyone had a blog and
Yeah,
people were used to writing in like, you know, short 5 paragraph essays about everything.
I
Um,
miss my Zanga.
oh my fucking God. I literally hadn't thought of that word in years, and you
Yeah.
said it, and the years just kept like fucking rushing past. Fuck, were you ever on LiveJournal?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
remember the LiveJournal days. I remember the exodus from LiveJournal to Blogspot.
Yeah.
And all my friends who like stubbornly stayed on LiveJournal and forced me to keep a LiveJournal account so that I could just talk to them.
Yeah.
Did I see a little tail walk by? Was
Yeah.
that a
That's
friend of
Bubbles.
yours?
She
Oh
was lying down behind me, and now she's staring out the window and probably is going to start barking at somebody real soon.
I'm really
Um,
glad. Bartleby? No, Bartleby fucked off. Yeah. He,
um,
yeah.
okay,
He
so we're 12 minutes into this recording, and
uh-huh.
well, I haven't said your name yet.
Oh my
Um,
God. Hi.
so cool. Hey, who are you?
I'm Jeeyon Shim. Hello. Sorry, everyone watching has basically just stepped into a conversation between friends catching up. I apologize.
Yeah.
Uh, my name's Jeeyon. I design games. I am currently out of work, but I'm also an outdoor educator. I work primarily teaching kids naturalist skills and homesteading and survival skills, but that career path is probably going to shift and change a little bit in the face of everything going on. And I guess what else is relevant to bring up? I have a Kickstarter going on right now for a game called Wait for Me, which is a 2 person to 1 person journaling game. And it's my cat's birthday in 2 days. I feel like that's very important.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. Yeah.
So I want to give a shout out to Bartleby, who's elsewhere.
Remember the
But
birthday
yeah,
cat is chilling.
yeah, exactly. How about you?
Um, yeah, I'm Joe. They know who I am. It's fair. I don't. If you don't, I don't know. Watch other videos. I don't really do much of anything. I'm like Gian, a games educator. We I am also like Gian at this present moment, fun employed, because it doesn't really become fun employment if you're not a game designer. Um, but when you take crippling economic straits and the choice to design games, fun employment.
Fun employment. Yeah, yeah. One of the things I'm considering, and I think I'm probably going to pursue actually, is going back to school. Because
Samesies.
yeah, I not a lot of people know this. It's not a secret. I don't hide it. It just like doesn't come up a whole lot. But I never got my BA,
Really?
and yeah, yeah. I went to high school that was really rigorous in ways that I look back and I'm grateful for, but in the moment I felt like I was dying.
Same. Hard same. We should talk
Yeah,
about that at some point.
yeah, yeah. But one of the cool things was there was a culture at the school of being like really enthusiastic and into like what we were learning. And so as a result, it wasn't really forced. It wasn't an affectation. Well, I mean, of course it was an affectation because it's high school, so everyone's pretentious, right? But like there was a real lovely culture in the student body of just like actively pursuing our intellectual and academic interests, which often also tied into like political interests.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a real culture among the staff and faculty of, you know, regardless of how ridiculous these kids sound, like just encourage it, right? And so, and it was ridiculous in retrospect now that I understand how much these resources cost. Like if you were, we got a LexisNexis account and we got a JSTOR account, and we were expected to use them for all of our work,
Same.
right? So yeah.
Yeah.
So wow, yeah, that's a really similar background. As a result, like you know, I did get into a few schools, and there was one in particular I really wanted to go to. There's this really, at the time, like for me, what I wanted, it was like a dream come true. This the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Great school.
and yeah, an amazing school, amazing MFA program. Also, though, like even with, I got the Pell Grant and the second federal grant that existed at the time, and even with that, I still would have graduated with something like a 90,000,
Yeah.
$95,000 like debt, and like I I just actually literally couldn't fathom just that amount of money existing in one place.
Yeah.
So I ended up just working, and I'm really grateful I did, because at this point, I still love art making, but it's not the cornerstone of my life the way it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm really fine with that. Like I'll probably come back to it in some capacity, but like I'm much more interested now in like education and land sustainability and ecological studies. And so in order to pursue those things past the point where I'm at right now, and I probably am looking at fast tracking my BA and getting a master's. There are some incredible natural resources programs like internationally and
Mm-hmm.
domestically, but got to have the BA first. So that's.
I mean, I was having a conversation earlier during which someone said that anyone who has been doing the same thing for like 30 years is probably the most boring person you can imagine. And that like all the most interesting people are probably people who started over at some point, past when you think a person should start over.
Interesting.
I generally agree with that.
Yeah. I wonder how much that's contextual too. For some reason, the second you said that, my mind leapt to something um, that doesn't really seem related. But are you familiar with the National Treasures program in South Korea?
Um, it sounds familiar. I don't want to say
Yeah.
yes if I'm completely off base, so tell me about it.
I think it's either, I can't remember what it's translated to. It's either like the National Treasures program or the Living Historical Treasures program, but basically in the same way that buildings and locations and
Yeah.
like tangible places are preserved historically because they have cultural meaning. South Korean government also pays people who dedicate their life to traditional skills to just
Mm-hmm.
continue doing those skills and then to take on an apprentice so that
Mm-hmm.
they never drop out. And like they can be incredibly specific. I learned through you know, like a late night Wikipedia rabbit hole, right? That like not only is there a national boyer, like someone who makes like the traditional fucking intense Korean horse bows, like just watching someone string a traditional horn Korean horse bow is like, it makes your whole body hurt because it looks like a circle almost, and you have to like bend it back the other way.
Mm-hmm.
It's fucking wild. But the person who makes arrows is a totally separate person. And of course they are, because the processes are
Yeah.
completely different. But like they both have their lives subsidized by the South Korean government so that they can continue not only making these crafts, but then like training someone who is also like committing to dedicating their life to doing it. It's an incredible program. It's very, very cool. But by definition, they're like doing the same thing
Yeah, totally.
for many, many years. And I wonder, yeah, I wonder what the internal life of that is like, right? As someone who's had trouble doing that for any kind of consistent period of time.
I imagine it's deeply peaceful. Because,
Yeah.
or rather, it might be that the task itself becomes one that's meditative.
Yeah.
Or it could
Well,
be that, like, the individual who pursues such a thing is just naturally inclined toward that kind of mentality.
yeah.
Or a combination thereof, but I can't imagine a person both attaining that expertise and continuing on that path if there was even a shadow of, like, restlessness within them.
Yeah. I having like just barely grazed the surface of bow making and arrow making, like traditional bow making
Mm-hmm.
and arrow making, it takes a lot of just steadfastness to stick with it.
Yeah,
And I love it. It's the kind of work that I love. Like that's the thing about these like traditional skills is the general umbrella they're classified under, and there's a lot to unpack there. But for lack of an alternative term
sure.
right now, um, you
Historical
know,
skills?
yeah, yeah, I know that like the Waldorf school system often talks about handwork, and what
Sure.
they mean by that is like literally anything that you craft with your hands, and
Yeah.
that's like a core part of their educational pedagogy. But yeah, so everything from natural dyeing to bow making to arrow making to even like animal husbandry, gardening, all of these
Sure.
things
I
like
mean, the categories of things we would probably historically class as labor. Um,
exactly. And like when I've participated in them and like I always want to keep unfortunately I'm kind of like a magpie and I just collected like the beginnings of all of these skills and fell in love with them and now I'm like fuck but I live in downtown Oakland how do I make this happen um
LARP is the answer.
yeah move out like get out is the
Yeah.
is the real answer but the all of these skills have intrinsically within them this like for me this process of you start doing them and then you enter that flow that
Mm-hmm.
like sweet spot that every designer is like seeking in play like when you're just completely in it to win it you're sort of aware of the fact that you are playing but like you almost don't care like
Yeah,
the
a flow state.
yeah exactly and all of these skills like are able to like really get me there very quickly in a way that a lot of other activities aren't. Certainly not anything more kind of like conventionally academic. Like I really
Sure.
struggled with traditional school stuff. It's why like the decision to go back is actually like not an unfraught one for me, right? But but yeah, like these really tangible physical concrete skills. I don't care if I'm good at them. I just like doing them. And I think that's actually one of the gifts that they give people. Like I have so many shitty carving projects that happened before I started carving things that I would feel good giving to anybody. Um, but I still treasure and love those projects, right? Like they're in my house. I keep them
Mm-hmm.
until I can figure out how to repurpose them, right? And I like the way that these skills encourage kind of like non-attachment. Like,
Sure.
at a certain point, if something breaks, like I guess you could throw it out, or you could be like, well, the materials are still good. I'll repurpose them. Like, you don't like it's a bummer, but you don't. It's
Sure.
not like mourning that I might do if like something was imbued with like a lot of meaning outside of like what it is because it's understood to be part of an ongoing process of learning an ongoing process of crafting um, I feel like there's a lot to be learned there in game design too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but it's hard to translate that over because I think ultimately in some ways maybe like you were saying it's also a mindset, right? And people design games for very I have learned over the last 2 years people design games for very different reasons.
Yeah.
And
So,
it's foolishness to assume that it's going to be universal anyway. So
on that topic,
mhm.
your Kickstarter, right? So,
Yeah, sure.
when I looked at the page, day it came out, one of the things I was surprised by is that the what I would have considered the game, right, rather
Mhm.
than the play of the game,
Yeah.
but the game object
Mhm.
is the final deliverable in a sense of the campaign itself. Um,
Mhm.
right, it comes after probably a good portion of people's play experience with the game object. Um, which is honestly, I don't. The closest I can think of are some of the more complex puzzle games that have come out of Kickstarter in the past few years, where you are sent,
Huh.
increasingly complex and strange packages that you are trying to understand as they arrive.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I've seen ads for those, and I've always wondered how they work
they're
because,
really cool.
yeah, they seem really cool. I can never sign up for them because my mail routinely gets stolen.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of them. Just to explain for people who might not
Yeah,
have the same
please.
basic reference, the um, the game that I'm kickstarting with my co-designer Kevin Culp is called Wait for Me, and the premise is that you are suddenly whisked out of your own timeline and you're time traveling involuntarily, like out of control through your own personal history. But every time you land somewhere, you have your diary, like your old diary,
Mm-hmm.
open in front of you. And so you have a limited, unknown amount of time when you can write to yourself. And you know that it's important that you do it because every point that you land is somehow pivotal in your life. And then you get whisked away. But the actual way that the game is played, for its first run
Mm-hmm.
anyway, is that it's sort of like an advent calendar. The format was really inspired by Banana Chan and Doug Lewandowski's game, The Wishing Sigil, which
Okay.
they literally advertised as an advent calendar. So every day in your email inbox, you get emailed a fresh prompt. And then the actual physical thing that's made is the journal that you write out. So in the game text, either you have, like a whole journal or even like loose leaf paper, um, whatever is the most likely to get someone to sit down and write. Which might not be the prettiest, like most beautiful
I
journal,
mean,
right?
it's
Like I
probably
always
going to be
feel
this for me.
right, yeah, and, like, I think that adaptivity, like, is really important. Some people, like, don't want to write a physical thing, they want it to be a digital artifact so that they can have it easily accessible on their phone and look at it later, and I think right now, especially the idea of, like, digital artifacts of play, like, analog meaning something else now, is really important to consider too. But I, as you can see, love tangible objects, and the idea of like creating like this little sheaf of entries to myself at various points of play was like really fascinating to me. And from a kickstarting perspective, it's wonderful to not have to think about distribution or manufacturing,
Yeah.
but know that every player is going to have something that they can actually literally hold in their hand if they want to. And additionally, it's like a collective experience. Everyone playing is going to get the same prompt on the same day if they do the email option. And so, like, if you wanted to reach out and be like, hey, who else is playing Wait for Me? Like, that's why we made the hashtag on Twitter. Like, I would love to know what your entry looks like. Like, there's a way to make it more collective as well. And of course, there's still a PDF that's going out because some people have email anxiety. Some people might not want to play every single day in August. Some people might want to replay it, right? Because there's a one player path and a two-player path. Um, the design implications that have been arising kind of organically as I've just like been play testing it, as I've been talking about it, just thinking it through, even just like taking demo photos are really interesting in this game. And like I don't know, there's a certain kind of wish fulfillment with it too, right? This idea. I mean, there's wish fulfillment in any time travel story.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think especially right now, there's like a lot of desire for uh, gentle, introspective wish fulfillment that maybe takes you out of this timeline,
Yeah.
just a little bit.
I mean, I do. I just there are some time travel stories that are very much not wish fulfillment, but most of them.
No,
I mean, like, I wouldn't say
absolutely.
like A Sound of Thunder, which is a story about a person who goes back and accidentally steps
Yeah,
on a bug and changes all of human history. Um,
right. Maybe not that. I would argue that even like my favorite movies, like I love Terminator 2
sure,
so much.
great film.
I don't know if I'd want to go into the Terminator timeline. It seems like a really stressful one.
I don't want to be in that universe, period. Let alone the part of the timeline where shit gets really bad.
No, yeah. There's a great, even though I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the actors, like overall, there's a movie called something in the Edge of Tomorrow. It's got like Tom Cruise and Emily
Just
Blunt.
Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah, it's just the Edge of Tomorrow.
Great
Okay,
film.
yeah, it's like a weird. Yeah, it's so good. It's
Yeah.
so good. And I wasn't expecting it to be, but it's like a wonderful meditation on love and commitment.
Yeah.
And I was like, why am I crying in the middle of
Yeah.
this Tom Cruise movie?
Yeah.
But it's so
It's
good.
so good.
Yeah, there's a real longing at the heart of every single time travel story. Like this very intense wish to like not live out the Cassandra myth. Like I think everyone is afraid of being the Cassandra in their own life, like knowing that there's advice and like knowing that you can see it and just like not doing it and fucking up irrevocably.
Yeah.
And time travel as a narrative fiction like just gives you this opportunity to be like, but you could have another chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
It's a very specific form of the superhero wish fulfillment drive, I think. Of like having powers beyond what a normal human does to make things different. Time travel just kind of takes that in a very specific direction.
yeah, yeah. And I love it. I love how constrained it is as a narrative device because then within those constraints, people do just like wild, amazing things. Like, really, really early in development for me, Kevin and I, like, I always ask, like, what are like the points of inspiration, like aesthetic inspiration or narrative inspiration you take from like other works? And that can be, I don't just mean movies or books, like it could be a painting, it could be
Sure.
whatever. But Groundhog Day came up for both of us. I love Groundhog Day.
Great film.
Like, yeah. And like I realized suddenly I was like, oh wait, I've already written a time travel thing. Like I've written Your Dead Friend, and I didn't realize.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't really think of it as time travel, and it's not exactly like I.
No, but I see where you're going with that, like, thought.
Like, yeah, it's the idea of a second chance, right? And
Yeah.
like that's the longing at the heart of all time travel is like you just fucking want another chance.
Yeah.
Um,
The time travel is, if anything, the villain of Groundhog's Day. The redeeming feature of it is him making a better choice.
Yes. Yeah. And like I actually love that because it's such a great teaching model for kids. Not to watch the movie. I don't want kids to watch Groundhog Day.
I don't know. I love it. I watched that movie when I was a kid. It was great.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely also watched it age inappropriately as a child also. But no, I really love that central idea of like you can just keep fucking up and fucking up and fucking up, like you can. But like that is actually a choice. Getting stuck is like, and there are lots of factors that go into it, some of them nigh insurmountable, but ultimately it is a behavioral path, right? And when you're teaching kids, like this, like how much of teaching kids is like, look, dude, you've been trying out path A like over and over and over. It's not making you happy.
Yeah.
Even if you're like, you know what, this also doesn't make me happy, like you could try a different choice.
Yeah.
Just like try making a different choice. And I think like there's something really wonderful about that too in the context of conversations about justice and just trying to be a better person overall. Like what does it look like if the conversation is just about, okay, well, you made that choice, there are going to be natural and logical consequences of those choices, but we all just move forward. So what choice do you make going forward?
Yeah.
And like that's actually the really nice thing about time travel as a story is it's a reminder of like you can like once you leave the story you're still stuck on the linear progression of time like all these other assholes, but like you can still make a different choice. Like you can effectively change your timeline, if nothing else just for the sake of doing something different.
I mean, it's in like top order, it is the core of the demarcation between games and static narratives.
What do you mean? Can you say more about that?
So like trying to think of the simplest way to put this. I'd say at core, the difference between a game that puts focus on narrative and a static work of narrative, film, book, whatever. Static meaning that the product as finished, as delivered, is the extent of the work absent any modification their user makes. The core of the difference is that with a narrative game, the choice is both implied on the part of the individual and necessary on the part of the individual, right? Making another
Mm-hmm.
choice,
Yeah.
trying something new, is the only way the narrative functions. Um,
God, I love that. Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. Like the act of making a different choice is in fact a necessity to the experience. Like you
mhm.
literally cannot play a game without making choices and acting on them. Like you just can't.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Whereas
literally
I
what it is.
basically I have a binary with a book, right? I continue
Mhm.
reading it or I stop reading it, and
Yeah.
that's the totality of my choices.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because in some ways like that mimics the like solo journaling is hermetic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like theoretically, like maybe you share it with people, but I know when I've kept diaries, I definitely don't share them with anybody. That's why the act of like intruding on someone's diary is such a huge breach of
Totally.
boundaries because it is like within the chamber of your own internal experience. And in some ways, that's very much like reading a book, right? Like, I, one of the reasons I have trouble with reading in a way that I didn't when I was young, when I was a kid, I was like voracious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I checked out so many books, often age inappropriate. Definitely read Robin McKinley when I was like 8 years old.
Nice.
Not cool, but also, she's a really fascinating writer
Mm-hmm.
who I would not have heard of otherwise. And like, um, when I read books, like at the time, it was like just taking it in, right? It was like being a bottomless well and just the rain falling in. But now when I read books, like I can feel them affecting me internally and like I have to sit and think about them. And it's much harder for me lately to read something long form. And I used to be able to read a book in a matter of hours.
Same.
And now it can take like days, if not weeks. Um, and I've noticed like a lot of it just has to do with like kind of digesting, just like ruminating on what I've read. And so it feels much more active then it often ends up being an impact, right? Like I think to a certain extent we're sort of seeing this in discussions with the okay, what now? Now
Mm-hmm.
that like the civil rights movement in the US is like moving beyond certain initial introductory conversations for a lot of people who, I'm going to say like a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago would not be engaging the way that they are now. There's
Totally.
something
100%.
about, yeah, but they are now.
Mm-hmm.
And one suggestion that I don't think is a bad one is to like read more, right? Read more by Black writers, read more off of these like very awesome lists. Even read things that are if you're white, like lateral, that are written
Mm-hmm.
by like other white writers that speak to you in a way that you might receive less defensively or emotionally, and then it's like okay cool you read it so now what, like there's a certain degree to which reading is a means to an end and that end is like actually developing yourself as a person. um it can't be passive, so but I think a lot of people um don't really know what that next step looks like, and I think
Yeah.
games are a great way to sort of go beyond like the act of soaking things in and be like okay so I've taken in the input, now what's the output, right? um yeah, I love games for that reason.
Same. I
So,
mean, basically, what brought me into games was that use of them. Um, my reintroduction to games had very little to do with games as consumer products,
yeah.
or games for fun, even. It was purely games as kind of a substrate for education. Um,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of work in that area. I will off uh, recording, off interview. I don't know what the phrase. I will send
Yeah.
you some stuff that I think you might
I
find
would
interesting.
love that. Oh my
Um,
goodness, absolutely.
so, one of the things, going back to your Kickstarter and just general things we've been discussing, how. So, for those who don't know Kevin Culp, he
Mhm.
previously did a game called Time Watch for Pelgrane.
Yes, I think it was for Pelgrim. He
Uh,
kickstarted it,
he
but it was
kickstarted it,
published.
and then Pelgrane dropped it. Dropped as in released, not
Yeah,
yeah, got rid of.
yeah.
Time travel game, fairly trad time travel game, but excellently done, honestly. Um,
Yeah, it's
so
amazing things.
yeah, it's really good for what it is. Absolutely. If I'm looking for that kind of big book experience, and what I want is a time travel game, I don't really know that I would go anywhere else. Um,
Right.
that is not the vertical, the niche of the already niche hobby we occupy that I feel like
Yeah.
I would think of you fitting into, um,
Yeah.
by choice or otherwise. How do
Right.
you hook up with Kevin on this? Like, what is the genesis of you two working together?
I mean, honestly, it's that we were friends and we
Okay.
were just talking about games in general, but also like when I think about the friendships that I've made within games, what's interesting is maybe it's I'm not saying this glibly, like maybe it's because I never joined a Discord server, maybe it's because I'm kind of a Luddite and like I have like the technologies that I feel affinity toward, and
Sure.
anything outside of it, I'm just like, no, thank you, because it makes me feel like out of like a fish out of water,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So often when I form friendships with people, it's exactly the way that I would make a friendship with someone who like is who I meet locally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I go to a show and we get in a conversation about a book, and someone's like, "Hey, I'd love to like sync up with you on Facebook," I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Because I love making friends. Like I love meeting people. And so we were just talking about games in general. And he comes from a very different design background than I do. And so I love talking to people who do things really differently than I do because I feel like it always like kind of stretches my horizons, and that there's always something to be learned. And then uh, he asked the question that I sometimes dread, which is like, I'd love to see some of your games. And I'm like, oh, would you?
Is that the end of this conversation? I'm gonna send those, and
Like,
then we'll never
well,
talk to each
it's
other.
always, I know that's always what I'm afraid of because people ask to see my games and they don't look like games, they don't read like games. And I'm always afraid that it's like going to be someone farting at the dinner party. Like people are just going to be really quiet and uncomfortable. So I was like, okay, I'll send you some. But he said some really nice, like wonderful and lovely to hear, but also like very specifically insightful things about them that made me think like, this could be someone who's really cool to collaborate with, specifically because our design experience is not like a circle overlapping on a Venn diagram, because it's actually very different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, I think that also has to do with timing. Like Kevin's been working in the field for a long time.
Yeah.
I only just started working in it late 2017, so like not even 3 years ago, because the organization I worked for was flirting with the idea of doing adult LARPs and adult programming through LARPing, right? um, and so it was basically like a thing I was doing as an extension of my day job.
Mm-hmm.
um, Very different than pursuing it initially as like a love of the hobby, I think.
Yeah.
um, and I'm really grateful for like all of the like relationships and friendships I've made in the field with people who just came at it from like wildly different backgrounds and have had wildly different experiences. And this collaboration has been like really vindicating of like stretching beyond your kind of default or baseline social circles,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because like I I don't even know what my baseline social circle is anymore. And I kind of like that. I like just having so many people who I talk to regularly about things that we both find genuinely interesting, that like something organic could grow out of that almost at any time. It just takes initiative and incentive.
Yep.
Um, and you know, I kind of saw the furlough and layoff like coming, you know, and
Yeah.
I was like, well, I know that I don't do well if I'm not like creatively occupying myself, and I fucking love working, unfortunately. So not working is not great for me.
Time to make your own work.
Yeah, pretty much. Like that's what I told. I was like, hey Kevin, like I need some kind of project. Like, do you want to collaborate on a game with me? And it's
It's like,
basically,
sure.
and it turned out to be a really cool partnership of like design and ideas, and also um like obviously a foundation of mutual respect in the friendship, but also like in the design work as well, right? There have been a lot of conversations I think going on right now about in a very young industry, in a very small industry, and in an industry that basically is a social industry. Like everyone, even if they don't know each other, they know someone who knows that person.
Yeah.
It's like being, I realize this is a religious connotation and I hope that's like cool for people, but
Sure.
like the analogy that I come back to a lot is like I am reminded a lot of being a member of a Korean American Protestant congregation in the South with like it started with very few congregants and then grew to like several hundred, right? Like you don't always know everyone exactly like the same, and like people sure do talk about each other in less than constructive ways sometimes, but often very warm and welcoming ways. But no matter what, like you're stuck there together. Like the South, when I was a kid there was not a booming Korean American population. And like the church was like the way that we had
Mm-hmm.
community, like real community, right? And like, the number of times that I was introduced to someone and they're like, oh, this is your aunt, this is your uncle. When you're a kid, you take that really literally. It took forever for me to realize like we're not blood relations,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was just a way of like, it's like your auntie, right? Like this is just someone
Sure.
who means something
I
to this
mean,
family.
I can count on one hand the number of blood uncles and aunts that I have. I thought I had like 50 when I was a kid.
Yeah, yeah, because it's about the connection. It's about what that relationship means, like literally and also symbolically, like to your family and like
Mm-hmm.
to the community you're trying to build. And so, like when because conversations around like what does community mean? Like, is tabletop games actually a community? Like, it comes up seasonally, like at
Mm-hmm.
least a few times a year. And I still don't know. I don't have any answers like definitively. Like I know a lot of people have strong opinions in
Mm-hmm.
many directions, and I don't really have a strong opinion in any direction because I'm like, I I don't know. Like I participate the way that I want to participate,
Mm-hmm.
which includes uplifting other people. It includes like me trying to learn more about the form and also like what I can do. Because for me, it's not satisfying to just make the game for the sake of making the game. Like I really want the games I make to help people,
Sure.
and what that looks like can be very different. Initially, it started off as just this really urgent need to try to guide people towards seeing their community as something other than human communities, to understand that like ecologically we are all in community with the land, with flora and fauna, that like even the weeds that grow in your yard are a part of your community. And the non-human community is core and essential, and the division from that is part of what's causing a lot of these larger ongoing problems that could like really end life as we know it for us if we don't get our shit together like very soon, right? um and wait for me is different because it doesn't have urgency in that same way, and it's not necessarily trying to point people toward land connection, but it
Mm-hmm.
is still pointing toward connection, which I think is a really quite large need right now.
Sure. I mean,
Um,
probably pretty obviously. Um,
like, yeah, yeah. Like for myself, right? Like I don't live with housemates. I often enjoy living alone, actually. Like as you can see right now, the clutter behind me would be absolutely intolerable. Like a human housemate, and this is just the way it's going to be for several hours until I get these fucking chairs assembled,
yeah.
right? But I don't care, and like what a fucking relief. But I'm also a very social person. I just talk at length about how I love meeting people and making friends. So like it's kind of killing me to not be able to just casually see people, and like and to not have these like huge multi hundreds of people gatherings where I know a good 50 to 150 people who I'm like really excited to see.
Yeah. Oh,
Hi,
crap.
Fernie. Oh, hi.
Hey, sorry, your video cut out very briefly,
Oh,
but your
I'm
audio
so
is fine.
sorry. Yeah.
Um,
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know. Basically, like I've been missing people, and how to connect with people in these circumstances while still being responsible. Like we're all kind of just learning it now and making it up as we go along. So I'm hoping that this game, it helps other people, but also that it helps me. Like I like just in play testing the game, like with Kevin and with other friends, I was like, I actually legit feel closer to the friends that I play tested this game with. Not in like a huge like kind of summer camp slumber party way, but just like there was a moment where like I wrote something with real sincerity and like a little bit of vulnerability, and I was like answered in the same way. And then we flipped it, right? There's like
Mm-hmm.
a mutual turn to the way that we played it. That was very cool.
Should send the prompts every day for your personal email.
What's that?
Should send the prompts every day for your personal email. Then you have like thousands of new friends.
Whew, crazy, yeah. I Yeah, I wrote a thread that was, I initially intended it to be like a very technical walkthrough of like how the two-player path works for Wait
Mm-hmm.
For Me, and I realized like there are technical aspects that are touched on, but it's such a personal game that in the middle of writing this thread, I'm like, I have to speak to my personal experiences of playing it, and it was really interesting. I was like, oh, I hadn't. It's that thing of like all the thoughts are in your head, but you don't put words to them in
Yeah.
output, and then the second you do, you're like, oh, this was actually more meaningful than I realized it was. So like, one of the things that came up for me in writing the thread was like, I'm Korean and Kevin's not. And so like one of the prompts is that I used as the example in that thread is like you get a chance to write to a now not late relative, but like a relative who you don't see as often,
Sure.
or a relative at a point in time when it's important to reach out. And I chose my grandmother, who like,
Okay.
not only was I like, there's no way Kevin's gonna write back in my grandmother's voice. Like even like my grandmother's a very distinctive, strong personality, right? Um, and also like I felt the same worry when I was writing as Kevin's grandmother, because we mirrored the playthrough so that we could experience what it was like from both sides
Okay.
as the traveler or the diarist. But also like, you know, I have many friends who are not only not Korean American, but they are also white. And that means like there's just going to be certain things that you can't mimic, that like it's actually important to not try to mimic. And so like my grandmother's experiences living through the Japanese annexation of Korea and all of that violence, World War II, the Korean War, which like they're so sterile, just these words, right? Like World War II, Korean War. There is like no putting to words how those two world events like tore apart the lives of people living in Korea. Um, like this, like, and the Korean War doesn't even really get taught, and
Not
it just,
much.
yeah, and it like destroyed people. It destroyed entire lineages. It almost destroyed the culture of the country. And it has, to this day, like the reality we live in of North and South Korea literally happened because some like US general was tasked with splitting up a country he'd never heard of, and he actually pushed it down the line to some fucking flunky who was just like, well, I guess this will do, and he like literally took a map and just drew a line through the middle
Mm-hmm.
horizontally, consigning the northern half of the country to like arid, rocky, infertile land that you can't grow anything in. There's no access to the coast, which is the majority of like food bounty. All of the fertile soil is in the south. And that's just economic concerns. That's not getting into the fact that, like, with one kind of tedious, like, bureaucratic task for an American military figure, like, all of these families were just severed forever, right? Um, and Yeah, it's like it's really, there was so much loaded in the fact that like just by virtue of me writing to a family member, I'm like, is this going to land okay? Right. And luckily we both had the same instinct, which is like, we're not even going to fucking try to mimic these like real people. We're going to write as like a kind of archetype in
Sure.
tone, right? There's like a maternal tone to both of our replies,
Mm-hmm.
very like nurturing and caring tone to both of our replies, which didn't feel jarring. And it, all of the things I was worried about, I was worried about getting like upset. I was worried about like feeling racially alienated. I was worried about all kinds of things. And it just didn't happen because it ultimately was just Kevin writing to me.
Sure.
And it's just like a chance for your friend to write to you with this like narrative alibi. Um,
Do you
yeah.
feel, so I guess two part. One, I would class this under the kind of thing that we might consider like how to play the game, like that sort of section about play guidance. Um, One, are you and Kevin including anything like that? And two, if you are, or if you are not, either way, I guess this comes down to, it's kind of a weird question. How much do you trust people to have as nuanced and considered a take with it as you and Kevin did?
That's actually a really good question. So to answer the first part, like, are we including a how you play? Yeah, that's a part of the game
Okay.
text. Because like the one player game is very intuitive. You're literally just writing to your cast self based
Sure.
on the prompt. The two player, I think it's intuitive once you see the demonstration,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it might not make as much sense, because I anticipate most people are going to be playing it close to the chest. We include uh, a way to play it where you're sort of playing a fictional character or a fictionalized version of yourself. And I think
Okay.
the degree to which you fictionalize yourself is a personal choice. Um, there are certain ways in which the game is stronger the closer to home you play it, but
Mm-hmm.
it certainly is not weakened by virtue of deciding to give yourself some buffer.
Sure.
Um, and there's like we in the safety section, like a big part of the safety section is like play with someone who you trust,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you at least have like strong rapport with as like a friend and someone who they don't have to be like your best friend of many decades, but they have to be someone who you trust to hold your internal experiences respectfully. So, there are many games people who I haven't known a super duper long time, but who I would absolutely trust to play this game with me
Sure.
because of the way that I've seen them behave in other scenarios that require that kind of mutual respect and compassion, frankly. And then, the other thing is like sometimes something's going to be like more impactful and maybe you'll want to talk about it with them. Maybe you'll be like, holy shit, this just brought up like this childhood memory I hadn't thought of, and it's actually quite joyful and I just like want to share it with somebody. You need to play with someone who can like probably hold that for you, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of weird, but to be like a main safety mechanic is like talk to each other. But that is honestly
Yeah.
like major safety mechanic in the game. It's also, I think, kind of a community safety mechanic. Like
It's
if
kind
you
of
don't,
like the safety mechanic.
yeah, like the number of times that I've been like, I'm sure this feel, mediating some kind of conflict between kids, and they're like getting so in their feelings about it, and like you're holding the space for them, and then you're like, have you talked
Yeah.
to your friend about it? And they're like, no. Like, cool. I can be there while you talk to your
Yeah.
friend about it, or I can be a little further away so that I'm not like there, but you've got to talk to your friend, man. Like
Yeah.
you just have to talk to each other as a first step,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it can't go past that first step, it will become very clear and we can go from there. But a lot of people don't go to the first step, right? That's one of the downsides of this like hyper connection of social media, of like online communication. It's so easy to feel like you're addressing a thing without actually talking to the
Yeah.
person. So we made that very explicit in the game text. Like a big part of how to play is you choose your co-player if you're doing two players wisely. It has to be someone who you feel good talking to,
Okay.
um, and who they feel good talking to you, right? Um, and yeah, I just don't. I think the game actually really doesn't work if it's played with with a complete stranger.
Sure. I mean, nothing of what I've heard makes me think it'll be a good con game, for instance.
Yeah,
Um,
it would not work at a giant convention.
yeah.
Probably not. Yeah, so that's the how to play part that
Mm-hmm.
you were asking about, and you know, I think maybe this is a little bit uh, candide of me, but I really do think everyone is capable of infinite nuance. I really, really
Sure.
do. I think I think that there are many ways that it's sort of like incentivized out of us, or maybe social dynamics or group dynamics incentivize approaching things in a more binary way often.
Sure.
But the beauty of an experience like this or a game like this is it invites introspection, it invites reflection, it invites people to look at things through a multifaceted lens rather than just a flat one. Because even the act of calling up a memory is so different, and it can be warm and wonderful, or it can be very fraught, and like the same kind of memory is not going to engender the same reaction, right? Something as simple as a birthday party of a like your seventh birthday party is, you just say those words, everyone has a different internal experience of it, and that's before you even get into things like the subjectivity of memory, the accuracy of memory. Playing this game alone, right, by yourself, just looking at your own past already is a very nuanced experience, I think. And it's something that I know that one of my early kind of design challenges that I'm learning um, to design differently now is how I used to leave things incredibly open-ended, because that's just how I
Sure.
think, and but people get a little bit stuck, right? Like there's choice paralysis, or they need a little more guidance to like get get into the game flow, like that flow state that you were talking about. And so one of the ways that we try to um, provide the constraint that people need as scaffolding is Kevin does these really cool, just with friends or like occasionally on Twitter, like write a story in exactly 100 words, not 100 words or under, but exactly 100 words. And often it'll go off of a single word as a prompt. So like regeneration or snow or something like that. And then you have
Okay.
to write whatever kind of story. And the only constraint is it has to be exactly 100 words. I did a couple of these prompts and I fucking loved them, because it's like writing a sonnet. Like the technical form of what you're doing provides just enough remove for you to go really deep if you want to, and do a lot of exploration if you want to. And so we kept that format. The word count is different. So
Okay.
like there's one prompt where you jump back to a point in your life when you're really, really young,
Okay.
and I was like, to honor like the fact that you would be writing to yourself when you're young, it has to be very short.
Sure.
So that word count is like a single digit, right? But then there's other word counts that are 100 words, 60 words, it depends. And the seeming randomness of those numbers is intended to sort of mimic the idea that you don't know when you're going to get pulled out.
Okay.
But also it's an exact word count. And again, to alleviate anxiety, it's like if you get to 59 instead of 60 words and you're ready to call it a day, that's fine.
Sure.
But that puzzle game aspect for me, it's like for me, I'm like, no, I want to figure out, because I'm very verbal and I really like playing with words. I'm like, I want to figure out how I can convey the same point I was making at 59 words, if not better,
Mm-hmm.
at exactly 60, the way the prompt is allowing me to. And getting into that like technical detail of it helps me get a little bit out of like the possibility of getting stuck in like emotional quicksand,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm puzzling out the wording, and that's a very different part of me, right? But you're still thinking about nuance, you're still thinking about complexity, you're still thinking about what you would say to yourself that you needed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Without necessarily getting really bogged down. And again, that's only my experience of playing the
Sure.
game and running it. I am sure that there will be people who do still get a little bit stuck, or maybe the word count makes them anxious. Like there's always, that's just subjective experience of a game,
Yeah, there's
right?
there's no way to completely design out analysis paralysis. It just
Exactly.
it's not
It's,
possible.
I mean, it can be as dependent on something like, are you at the end of a work shift? Have you
Yeah.
eaten breakfast yet? Are you
Yeah.
caffeinated? Like depending on how people just are, like
Yeah.
that's so random too. Um, but like um, I recently got an ADHD diagnosis, but like looking back, I'm realizing like, oh, this is actually something I've lived with my entire life, basically. And one of the first things that happens always with like adult ADHD is like people start talking about routine, the importance of routine, the importance of structure, but also how that's not going to be conventional. Like you can't do a grocery list the way a normal person might, or a neurotypical person might. You can't really like just organize things with labels and stack them. Like that's basically like sending something into a black hole. You're just
Yeah.
never going to think about it again. It's almost like not having object permanence, but
Yeah.
for things like not just literal objects, although that's very true, but also things like time or event planning. or even relationships. It's very weird. And being like the object permanence analogy really helped me understand like, oh, my routines have to be very grounded in the present. And
Yeah.
that's what that word count is supposed to simulate. It's like we are literally just pulling you in. You can play this game any time of day. The emails will probably go out in the morning. Um, and if you want to do it first thing as like a morning journal activity, I think that's a great idea. But if you're someone who needs to be able to fit things in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
how do we still provide that structure? How do we still provide that strong
Mm-hmm.
scaffolding? That's what the exact word count. That's another function that it fulfills.
Sure.
Hopefully. Um, but also, not everyone responds to structures the same way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, as someone who's had an ADD diagnosis since probably before I could have written the letters AD and like,
Yeah.
I always think of the movie Memento as
Oh,
like that
interesting.
would be a good way for me to do a list. I just like write
Mhm.
the important things on my body, and then I
Oh,
look at
yeah.
them in a mirror, and then I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to address my object permanence. Um,
Yeah.
Honestly, I think getting an email every day is going to be as much of a kind of prompting mechanism, right?
Yeah.
You could send me the same 30 prompts every single day. It's not that I'm getting a new prompt each day that matters to me, it's that I'm getting prompted each day.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah,
and it's
I'm the
just,
same way. But one of the first things that came up when the campaign went live was were people messaging us saying like, "Hey, like, um, daily emails might kind of stress me out. Is there a way that I can just buy the PDF
sure,
because that tier?" And so we're going to include a backer survey at the end saying like, at this tier where you can get the PDF, would you actually prefer to just get the PDF and opt out of the email,
sure,
right? And some people are going to take that.
totally.
I think adaptivity is like really important for any kind of process. And I think like the thing to understand, sometimes people respond to not liking a game as though like that's kind of the end of the discussion. And it's like, well, no, because first of all, you're going to be a different person in a year than you
Mm-hmm.
are right now. You can always, if you want to try, you can always revisit it, right? But also, like playing games is also a learning process. Playing games is a skill,
Mm-hmm.
right? Games are skills. They're a conglomeration of several different skills that are synthesized into this weird alchemy of like a shared experience. Whether it's a solo game that you then share the experience with later, whether it's a literal group game like a tabletop game, whatever. And the core part of any skill is like when you fuck up, that's not the end of the line. Like you still have to keep going. You have to make other choices as you
Yeah,
move inexorably forward. And like I think especially because we're a community where the designers and the players and the consumers are often all the same people.
yeah.
It's hard not to take it personally if someone's like, yeah, I was hoping to like the game, but I didn't. Um, and like that's on every side, as designer, as
Sure.
creator, as designer, as consumer, as player, whatever.
I mean, I want to say in addition, and a thing that I've definitely observed is there's almost this acculturation of and so what you've been describing is essentially a growth mindset, right? Like focusing on the fact that perfection in the thing is not the purpose of the thing, but making progress toward
Yeah,
a kind of a better future idealized point is. Um,
yeah,
that is both entirely true. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and frankly, not a terribly widely adopted mentality. Um,
well, it's hard. It's hard if you're American, especially, I think.
sure.
But I think it's also hard because when you're an adult, you have baggage, right? Like you're just looking back constantly, thinking about all the things you could have done differently,
Mm-hmm.
not recognizing that as like a core part of the process. Uh, and it's easy, I think, for adults to get wrapped up in a sense of perfectionism around all kinds of shit, right? And like also, I think being American actually affects that a lot as well because we're so outcome oriented and we're so product oriented. Like,
Yeah.
and we're also like really, like, I don't know how to put this, but like Western narrative oriented, like beginning, middle, end. That's how every story
Sure.
goes. There's always going to be an end. We're always going to be able to tell when it's the end. There's often, usually going to be some kind of like sense of moral redemption or moral
Sure.
justice. It's like delivered at the end. Without
I
that,
mean,
the story is incomplete. Like,
I tend to
all of
think of it as success as measured by degrees of like divergence from a formula.
yeah,
It's like I have this formula in my head of what success looks like, and the degree to which I am successful is not did I get it, not did I actually succeed, but how many steps away from my imagined success is my actual success. Um,
yes, yeah. Yeah, it's a way of keeping at bay the fear of the unknown, right?
mhm.
Like that core existential dread that like many of us cross culturally share. This fear of uncertainty, which I definitely have, right? I think most people do, with very very rare exceptions. It seems like a very there are so few universals in the world of being afraid of what's to come. Like at some point in your life, that seems pretty core to the human experience. And like this idea of like stories are tidy, stories have three acts, stories will deliver something that is like satisfying at the end. What a wonderful way to step out of acknowledging that like that's not what life is like, right? Life is a continual process, and you don't know when it's going to end for you. You don't know that your life is going to be a tidy arc, that like you don't know what your legacy is going to be like you just don't know. And i like I was raised with the Western canon, right, just like by virtue of living in this country. Also like as a kid my interest in literature was like really strongly encouraged. But you know, my parents were not like, we must decolonialize young Jeeyon. Like they just got me the books that were cheap at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
A lot of them are like Penguin classics, right? Um, and uh, and I'm learning how much of my design sensibility, just like my own emotional landscape, even is defined by this like idea that like stories are linear, stories progress linearly. They fucking don't. Um, some of my favorite Korean movies are stories that drive a lot of my friends just absolutely wild with anxiety because they just don't like Parasite, for example,
Great film.
right? So many people were like, was it a dream? Was it real? Do they end up in the house? And it's like, you're not supposed to
Yeah.
know. That's not the point. Like, that's not the point,
Yeah.
right? And there's a
This
much
isn't
older movie.
Inception, right?
Yeah, it's not Inception. It's not. Yeah, it's actually just a different kind of storytelling. Um, there's an older movie called Winter, Spring, Summer, Fall.
Great film.
No, spring, yeah, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, and like
Yeah.
it ends on the repetition of the season, and it's really like I don't know how many people I've talked to have been like, why didn't they just end with 4 seasons? And I'm like, because it's a cycle. Because it's a cycle.
Because if they end with four, it's a straight line.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And like so many people have watched it and been like, I don't what was with that? I'm like, I don't know, dude. What was with it? Like you tell me. But I'm like, really, I'm not trying to dunk on anybody, you
I
know?
mean,
It's discomfort. It's discomfort with this idea that
sure.
things don't end, right? And therefore you just don't know. But I love stories and I love media and I love experiences that can like kind of gently remind you of that in a way that isn't existentially terrifying. um, I don't know.
No,
It's a for me it's comforting, right? Because
it's
what
a
that
good
means is
answer.
that yeah, yeah. It's like when I fail, that's not the end of the story.
Yeah.
I personally find a lot of comfort in that
Yeah.
idea. Um, yeah.
As a quick aside, and I assume you probably are aware of this, but just in case you're not, the South Korean government started a project, I want to say last year, to start digitizing and putting on YouTube for free, like a mass archive of Korean
Yeah.
film dating back to like the
Yeah.
1940s, I want to say.
I was so excited when I saw that. It was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like even the really I don't know, like cheesy Korean movies are still really fascinating to me. Like there was this movie I watched that's based on an autobiography. I think the translation is like the story of my father, and it's told from the point of view of a man who's looking back on his life, and it's sort of inspired by Forrest Gump. You know, like there's like
Yeah.
significant historical figures who show up, but it starts with the Korean War, and it starts with specifically his family trying to escape Chinese Air Forces just completely destroying a village of something like 50 or 60,000 people. And it's a fascinating piece of international history. Like there was a military merchant ship that was not intended to have any passengers. It only really had room for like a 40-person crew. And the captain decided to take on as many people as they could fit and like single-handedly saved 10,000 people. But that still means 40 or 50,000 people
Yeah.
died. And that's the beginning of the movie. And even though it's like super cheesy and I'm like, it's like so obvious in like the ways that it like tugs on your heartstrings in like certain ways. Nonetheless, there were certain points when I was just like openly fucking weeping. Like it was so funny because I was watching it with my sister and we were staggered. So we were like really deliberately not making eye contact because we knew. And one of the parts of the movie that really got me, and she warned me, she'd actually seen it already, and she was like, I think you should watch this movie. Um, and it was the reunification program that ran in I want to say the late 80s. So this was before the internet, this was before cell phones.
Yeah.
This was like literally the only way people could try to do this. But the SBS, which is the main television broadcasting network in Korea, decided to try to reunify families that might have relocated or gotten separated during the Korean War, which, you know, again, was through the impetus of American military intervention, right, in the wake of World War II. And so that means there were a lot of transracial adoptees. That means there were a lot of people with language barriers. And so they literally were like, outside of our broadcasting headquarters, you can come with a sign, send your name, the name of the relative you're looking for, their description at the last time you saw them, any physical artifacts you might have, like clothes or whatever. And then one by one, we will put you on camera and you'll say where you last saw them, what their relation is to you, and then we will give people time to call in. And so people were just glued to their screens for hours a day. The broadcasting network thought it was going to last like a few weeks. It lasted months and months and months. And they did successfully reunify some people. And so this movie shows that campaign. I had no idea that this happened because by the time I was born, it was already starting to kind of peter out. And by the time that I was aware of what I was watching on the TV screen at all, the reruns of this reunification program were run every year throughout the 90s on the off chance that maybe they missed somebody. But what that did is like effectively what it meant was just like my relatives would be like weeping in the living room and I wouldn't understand what was going on, you know? And the ways again, like that memory almost feels like time travel. As an adult, you learn to piece together the things you couldn't piece together as a child. I didn't have the understanding of Korean history that I do as an adult when I was a child, but in many ways I was living it way more vividly and way more immersively because I spent entire seasons in Korea with my family regularly as a child, and I can't do that now as an adult. And that's really fascinating to me, the ways in which like thinking about memory and time travel, like again, as like Western narrative, Western media kind of like trained creators and people, we want to put even in like in a story that's about nonlinear progression, we want to put a linear progression on it. And like it's just not like that, you know? And like no time travel really is. It's always going to be messy and it's always going to result in a lot of fucking up. And I love that because what a beautiful like metaphor for just what it's like to live as a person. You know, like no one is poised actually for all that like you can groom your presentation to look that way. Internal experience is never linear. It's never tidy. It's always messy. And I really love that about time travel. This idea of like, oh, you think, right? Edge of Tomorrow. You think by fixing this one thing, everything else is just going to fall into place. It's fucking not. You're going to make it so much worse. You have no idea.
I mean, the film I think that always comes to mind for me, I mean, probably maybe an obvious choice, but did you ever seen Primer? Shane
Yeah.
Carruth's, yeah.
Oh, it's so fucking weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Primer. I'm not gonna lie, that's one of the times I've concentrated the hardest during a movie, and I loved it. I loved that
It's a
it was
great
like,
movie.
so, yeah, it's so good, and I think it's underrated because people don't understand it right at the jump, which is, I think, fine
Mm-hmm.
to like go through an experience and not get it. Like you can walk out of something being like, I really like it, I didn't get it. Like I think that's fine.
The sequel he did to it is, or
Is this
I
the
guess not a
cool?
sequel, it's a follow-up.
Okay.
He has another film that he did after called Upstream Color, which
Ooh.
is about, I can't even like give a base. Like it just,
I
I
fucking love that when you're
yeah,
like trying to struggle to even describe a movie.
yeah.
I
Anything
love
that I
that.
would say would skew your interpretation of the film.
Oh,
Um,
very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. I love Primer. Looper is pretty good.
yeah,
Um there's that when I think of, how like every now and then there are just certain scenes in a movie that are like so horrifying that you're like, cool, I'm gonna be thinking about this for
the
the rest of my life.
old man crawling his way, losing
Yes.
pieces of his
That's
body as he's
exactly
crawling.
That's exactly the one.
Yep.
That one. I remember I saw it in the theater and I was like, yeah, that is seared into my brain. I'm never, ever, ever, ever gonna forget that.
Yeah.
That and noticing that Emily Blunt's character had the same IKEA bed sheets that I do. Those are the two things that
Nice.
really stuck with me from that.
What's his name? The old man from the future who is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's boss,
Yeah.
saying, "Kid, I'm from the future. When I say learn Chinese, you should learn Chinese." Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
is
That's
one of
cool.
my all-time favorite like villain lines, probably.
Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah.
I'm from the future. Take what I'm saying seriously.
The, like exasperation in it.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's good. Gosh, trying to think. I feel like, it's funny. I really enjoy time travel movies, and I love especially the Groundhog Day trip. That's
Sure.
probably why I liked Edge of Tomorrow so much. But I don't know if I've ever played a time travel game. Like, I don't think I've ever done that.
There are not. I mean, one, there are not that many.
Yeah, yeah,
Both digital and analog.
yeah.
I mean,
I can't even think of a video game.
here,
Like,
I'm just. I hope this doesn't mess up my recording. I don't think it will, but time travel video games.
fascinating because it's such an immediate visceral archetype. Like everyone has a favorite time travel story. Everyone kind of imagines like if you could time travel, where would you go? Like it's a very like juicy narrative mind, but people don't really design a lot of games about it. I think
It's.
that's one of the like Time Watch is a really, really excellent game. It's also a very unique game because not a lot of people do time travel, and I wonder why.
I think it's a
Um,
technical challenge,
oh yeah, what do you
right?
mean?
So, and this is especially true in digital, but I think it's also true in analog. Um, I just think they're separate issues. So in
Mhm.
digital, I'd imagine, how can I convince you that you have the power to travel through time if, for technical reasons, you only actually have the ability to travel to very specific points in time, and the more of them I create, the more limited I'm going to be able to show you of each of those. So I can either
Right.
have you travel to a point or two and make them rich and interesting, or like 30
Mhm.
that just kind of all suck. Um, just the
Yeah.
ability to create that many assets, that much choice is difficult. I think you could do it the way like Life is Strange sort of does, where you
Mhm.
can rewind. So like
Yeah.
short-term time travel, um,
Yeah.
but proper time
Oh,
travel is hard.
I was reminded of this because for some reason, you talking reminded me of have you seen Galaxy Quest?
Oh, absolutely, great film.
I love
Love the
Galaxy
movie.
Quest so
Yeah.
much. It actually aged very well
Oh yeah,
too. I
really
rewatched
good.
it recently and I was like really scared too, but it's actually still very
I
fucking
mean,
funny.
Tim Allen is a huge piece of shit, but like otherwise,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Learning that was not awesome. Also like I'm shocked at like how well the jokes still land actually. But there's that conceit, right, of like the powerful weapon actually turns out to be a time machine of just 13 seconds, and it's like, what the fuck does 13 seconds get you? And like someone says like it's enough to change a single mistake. One more choice, right? Just change one choice. And it reminded me of that game by, I think it's Jason Morningstar, Juggernaut.
Yeah, that's Morningstar.
Yeah, that's one of the few. I remember really wanting to play that game at one point, but I was just like tired, and I knew cognitively I wouldn't be able to do it justice. But that game, for people who aren't familiar, like I think it might actually even be during the Korean